But I want to welcome all of you who are joining our webinar tonight. My name is Tim Cole, and I work with Waypoint Church Partners, and Waypoint exists to help Christian churches and churches of Christ in the Mid-Atlantic region in particular to get on mission and to stay on mission. And so 3 years ago, we started this monthly webinar called the Waypoint 55, where we try and tackle ministry-related topics for church leaders in 55 minutes or less. And so we've got about 40 webinars that we've recorded over the last 3+ years, and really more than 50 if you count the ones that we've done over the last 6-9 months that are pop-up webinars, 35 minutes in length, and as well as a whole group of 10 ideas in 10 minutes or less videos that we've done as well, about one a month, on a variety of topics like children's ministry, regathering plans, how to connect with those people in your church that are not digitally connected. You can't Zoom with them or anything. So they're great topics like that. So we want to clue you into that in just a second. We're going to show you a slide, but we want to welcome you tonight to our webinar. If you're relatively new to a webinar environment, down at the bottom of your screen, there are a couple of buttons that we want to have you use tonight. Of course, you're using the chat, which is something that everybody can see. There's also a Q&A button that's probably the most important, that if you have a question for one of our presenters, that you would hit the Q&A button right when you think of the question, even if we may not get to it till later, and type your question in. And we've got a little window over on the side of our interface here where we can see all the questions that are being typed in, so we know which ones we can try and address immediately or at the end of the webinar, or if we're not able to get to them at the end of the webinar, then we will follow up with you within the next day or so, because we have then a report of all those questions as well. So as soon as you think of a question about our topic tonight, go ahead and type that in and we will try and get to that. We want to thank Mid-Atlantic Christian University, one of our partners, for sponsoring our webinar platform, as they have since the very beginning. Waypoint exists to come alongside leaders and churches and to navigate ministry together. Waypoint is a navigational term where it's markers on a journey to make sure you're headed in the right direction. And we feel like that's part of the role that Waypoint gets to serve in our region, is to help churches and leaders to realize in all the twists and turns of ministry that they're still headed in the right direction. And so this webinar series hopefully is exactly one of those ways, where it's particularly for leaders within the church, whether they're staff or not. And it's about how to build a solid benevolence plan for your church. And we've got other webinars, and we do want to invite you to go to the YouTube channel, Waypoint Church Partners, and hit the subscribe button and the bell next to the subscribe button. And there are playlists that we've set up for different ministries within the church. So we've got a group of webinars for elders. We've got a group of webinars for prayer teams, another one for missions teams, some for outreach, safety and security, and so on. And so we would love for you to go to the YouTube channel, hit both subscribe and the little bell, so that you get notified every time that we upload one, that you can hopefully also share those with your friends that are part of that particular ministry area. If you're not on the prayer team, but you get notified that our latest one came up and it was a prayer topic, if you would share that with your friends on your prayer team, then they'll be able to know that they can hopefully come to our next webinar about having a great prayer ministry at your church. But tonight we're talking about how to have a really solid benevolence plan at your church. And I can tell you, I was really interested in this topic because of my experience in the church. When I was in grad school, when my wife and I first got married, we lived in a church, not in a parsonage next to the church. We physically lived in an Episcopal basilica in downtown Cincinnati, actually across the river in Covington, Kentucky. And so it was right in the heart of the city. And I was a naive young seminary student. And so we would get people knocking on this big glass wall where the office little reception area was, and they were wanting help or soliciting help of some kind. And so I went to the office, not knowing the way the church world worked, and I realized they had a very solid plan for helping people that knocked on the door, because their plan was say no to everybody. And that was their policy at this downtown church, was it doesn't matter who comes or what they need, we ain't helping nobody. And so that was my first introduction to having a plan. And it was very simple and easy to carry out, but it wasn't very helpful to anybody. And then as a pastor at three churches, I've realized that most of the time we've kind of got an idea of what we'd kind of like to do, but never really formalized a plan that helped us make decisions well when needs arose. Whether that's from people outside your church that are requesting help of some kind, but especially for those people that are inside your church, that you've got some kind of idea about the parameters of how you're going to help them. And so I want to introduce you tonight to two of our presenters. They're from the same church, Craig Bishop and Lexi Cook, and they're from a great partnering church with Waypoint, the New Life Christian Church in Winchester, Virginia. And so Craig is the senior minister and has been there many years, and he's going to kind of introduce the topic of where they've been at New Life. And then we'll transition to Lexi, who's more recent on staff, that has really helped them come together with a plan that works for both those sides of the issue, outside and inside. And so I'm really looking forward to what they share about how they came up with the plan and what it turned out to be. There is going to be a follow-up email tomorrow that you'll receive tomorrow night, automatically generated 24 hours after the fact. And in it will be a link to some things that they refer to, but especially some slides in PowerPoint form that'll have some of the information that you'll hear tonight. So you won't have to take notes for everything that you hear tonight. But Craig, thanks for joining us. I know Stacy, your wife, is joining us as one of the participants tonight, and your church is such a great partner of ours. Stacy's on our board of directors currently, but we've been great partners, and your predecessor, Larry Veach, was an officer of our board multiple times. And so we're really glad to kind of feature what you guys have worked through here in the last several years. So tell us a little bit about your story.
Sure thing, Tim. We really appreciate the opportunity to share. I was tempted to say long-time listener, first-time caller, because these webinars have really been invaluable for us over these last couple of years. Like Tim said, my name is Craig Bishop. I am the lead pastor at New Life Christian Church in Winchester, Virginia. You've probably heard of Northern Virginia. We're north of Northern Virginia because we're actually in the triangle at the top of Virginia, in a county of about 80,000, on a church with about 8,000 churches, on a road, with about 8,000 churches. But benevolence was one of those things that I feel like we didn't talk about in Bible college, how to deal with it when somebody knocked on the door or called in. And so it's one of those things most pastors and lay people learn kind of on the fly. You learn it when the first person makes the request. I've been at New Life since 2010. We're a church of about 340 pre-COVID, and we're outside of town, and there's no sidewalks in front of our building, and yet for my entire time here, we've had a pretty regular run of walk-ins, drive-ins, phone calls, asking for assistance for a variety of very specific issues. And so for us, the story of how we came to entirely change our benevolence process begins with how we dealt with it before. Like I said, we'd have those calls, we'd have those walk-ins, and it always surprised me how often it happened. I think it also surprised me how difficult it was to have to say no as often as we did. When it came to external benevolence requests, typically our process was to do our best to point people to local resources, but to ultimately say there was nothing we could do. We gave a significant portion of our giving, a percentage off of our giving, to some local partners that were doing some great work. And we felt like the best way we could support folks was by supporting those agencies that had their own protocols, that had their own standards, their own guidelines. And so ultimately, when someone would ask us for assistance, I'm a little embarrassed now to say that we would simply tell them something to this effect: unfortunately, we don't keep funds on hand for these purposes. We give everything we can to these local partners. And I think we felt like that was a good compromise. But I'll also tell you, it never felt good to have to say that. We just didn't feel like we could vet people the way that maybe an organization could. We didn't feel like we could research situations to find out what was true and what wasn't. And so this was our best compromise. We'd give our money to those organizations and send people to them. But eventually, what we began to notice was that people would say, well, I already called the organization A, B, C, D, and they don't have any resources left. There's nothing they can do. So is there anything you can do? And it became clear that our system wasn't necessarily effective. We didn't really know what to do, so we continued with that for quite some time. But I kept thinking it needed to change. I didn't know what, I didn't know how. I kept coming across James chapter 2 and being convicted because I felt like I was saying, keep warm and well fed, but I wasn't doing anything for these folks that were asking for our assistance. And around the time that I was really getting to the point of struggling with this, the rest of my staff let me know that actually they were having the same thoughts. You know, they would take the phone calls, they would deal with the drop-bys, and they didn't like having to say no either. On top of that, we felt like we've been very blessed as a church, and we felt like we had the money we needed to, if the systems were in place, to begin to help in some of these external situations. It really was just a matter of, do we know what we're doing? And so for us, it began by looking around our congregation. If there's nothing else you walk away with from tonight, it might be this. If you get to know the people in your congregation, you might realize that in situations where you need expertise that you don't personally have as a pastor or as a lay person, as a volunteer leader, that someone else a row or two over might have knowledge, experience, skills, passions, and they're just looking for a way to serve and can bring their expertise to the table. And so a young man who had graduated from our youth group had left for college, gotten married and come back, and he and his wife had begun to attend. And spoiler alert, his wife was Lexi. And so I heard his wife worked at social services, and I thought, here we go. Here's somebody who knows more than me about this and dealing with a lot of the same situations, but doing so with guidelines and systems in place. And I thought, well, let's get some information. So I reached out, I asked her to meet with me. My goal was to pick her brain, to ask her if she'd be willing to help us craft a plan. Prior to that meeting taking place, my wife actually said, you know, kind of offhand, oh, it'd be nice if we could just hire her. And the truth was, we have a long-standing commitment to doing projects and reaching into our community and getting our people involved in the community. And we began to think about how we could piece together a job that would lead in some areas we had been struggling. And so we took it to our elders, we took it to our church council, and about a month later, even though the goal was just to pick her brain, we had hired Lexi onto our staff. Now, I understand some of you may think, well, I can't just hire somebody to do this. You know, maybe you're solo, maybe you're a lay person, maybe you're a volunteer that wants to help in this area. I understand that completely. But the truth is, Lexi was willing to help whether she was hired or not. You may have someone extremely qualified or extremely passionate that would be willing to take a large chunk in this area and lead with it and teach others, teach you even, how to more effectively respond to these needs, even if they as a person don't have the time to sit in the office all day and handle phone calls. When you bring someone in with passion and expertise in an area like benevolence, it really can change a lot of things. I think sometimes as pastors, we feel like we have to be an expert on everything. I know I've been there, but part of moving the church forward involves finding the right people, inviting them onto the bus and getting them into the right seats. And for us, you know, that's some staff, some of that is volunteers, some will be advisors, and some are simply advice givers. But you need to find out who's already in your congregation and make sure they have an opportunity to bring what they have to the table. And so we hired Lexi and we said, help us tear this whole thing down and start from scratch. And, you know, I'll let her share what that ended up looking like.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Craig. I'm Lexi, and as Craig mentioned, I am a former case manager and benefit specialist at our local social services here. And I'm just so grateful for the opportunity I have to be joining the mission of reaching the lost. You know, to start a successful benevolence plan, it's important to have your leadership on board. You're going to want them to approve of a budget. That's going to be incredibly important. That's going to help you be responsible financially and also consistent in what you're doing. The staff and I had talked, we kind of got a better idea of how much we think we would need each month, and we brought it to our elders and to council, and they were able to review and approve of a monthly budget. And that has definitely, kept us consistent, and also makes it easier when you know upfront how much you have per month to spend. When we get a phone call or a walk-in, it's going to be really important to track that information. You're going to want their name, their phone number, their address, and are there children in the household. The reason this information is important is obviously their name. You want to know, have you spoke to them before? Are you aware of them? Are maybe they a part of your congregation? Any relations there? Their address is going to be important. We certainly don't want to turn anybody away, but we certainly want to focus on individuals in our community. We frequently get calls outside of the community, and as much as we would, love to help them, I'm more knowledgeable, and we are more knowledgeable about the resources in our community. So typically when we do receive those phone calls, I will point them in the right direction towards something or social services in their community, or an organization in their community. When we do receive benevolence, our goal is to lead them to resources that are better equipped to help them in their need. And that's where it's going to be really important to know what you have in your community. Be familiar with your local social services, your local United Way agencies, centralized intake, United Way agencies, your shelters, your CCAP. And a lot of times those places will have a directory available for you to get your hands on. And that's really going to help you get familiar with what organizations are available. And as Craig mentioned before too, really just know the people in your congregation. Maybe somebody can, certainly help you. Maybe they volunteer at these places, maybe they work at these places, and you'll be able to get a connection there. And if you call and just talk to them, let them know a little bit about what you're doing, they're happy to talk to you, and they're happy to see what you're doing, and they're happy to give you information. I do want to talk a little bit about social services as well. Being a former case manager there is a lot of services that people are not aware of. There is a TANF program. Now that is going to be in Virginia, and other states are going to have that as well, but it may be called differently. And what that is temporary assistance for needy families, and Virginia Initiative for Employment, Not Welfare. That is an excellent program for families with younger children in the household. That's going to have, that's going to have opportunities for new jobs and new job skills, and being able to go back to school, and providing childcare for families. There's also SNAP, which is formerly known as food stamps. There's burial services, which we have gotten calls about that before. Again, childcare. A lot of people don't know about childcare services that are there, but that is definitely an option. Families are in situations where they're having to choose to stay home or work because childcare is just so expensive, and they may have, one parent staying home, being a stay-at-home parent, while the other one is, working, but they're limited on funds just having one individual working. There's also energy assistance as well as emergency assistance. Now, you may have heard individuals say, well, I've called them, I've spoke with them, and they can't help me, or they've ran out of funds. And you may wonder, social services running out of funds? That is actually a thing. They are limited on funds, and when they're out, they're out. It's first come, first serve. As well as the eligibility limit for these services are typically pretty low. And what we've come to realize, a lot of these lower income families and individuals, they may have a steady income, but they are just not good at budgeting. And they run into the situation where at the end of the month, they're, calling and scrambling around trying to find, um, you know, extra help to meet those needs. And we have definitely noticed that it comes down to a budget issue for a lot of families. And maybe you have somebody in your church that is willing to help these individuals, or maybe you have a local program. Our local United Way agency offers an excellent program around here. And we also have a couple more organizations that are fantastic to help with budgeting. And we also have somebody in our church that is helpful with budgeting. So that is certainly important when thinking of assistance. And if we feel that we cannot refer individuals to local resources, that's when we start looking to see if we can assist. With me working at social services, I do know there's gaps in our system, and we do see that. A huge one is housing. We are so limited on housing around here, and thankfully we have organizations in the work that are making more affordable housing available. We have centralized intake, and they are fantastic, and you should have a centralized intake as well wherever you may be. But unfortunately, it is not a quick process. They cannot move these families in overnight. So sometimes it takes them a week to 2 weeks to get these families in. And this little bit of money that this family has, instead of saving that for potentially a security deposit on a home, they're now having to stay in a hotel or motel with their families, and they're just now setting themselves up for a future problem and just trying to get by. And we see that time and time again. Another gap in our system that we see is, children with disabilities. When they age out, if they are not placed in a home, their caregivers and parents really struggle. And a lot of times they stay home, or they have to cut back on hours working to be able to care for this individual. And they are very limited on resources available for them and funding available for them to help them. So if we feel that, a need falls in the gaps, or maybe they've gone through the organizations and maybe they've already sought assistance, and we feel it's a need that we can meet, we as a staff approve together and see if we can assist. And if we do, we certainly try. And again, we maintain our budget and we respect our budget. And some notes with that, if we are able to assist, is number one, we never put ourselves in a situation where we are alone with an individual. For your safety, their safety, as well as you want somebody else there just to be able to hear the conversation and have a better understanding of what is going on. You never want to give out cash or checks. Anytime we pay a bill, we do it directly. And, with COVID, it's actually been a little more helpful to be able to do those things over the phone or online, and avoid sometimes that face-to-face contact, although we certainly miss that a little bit, but COVID has made it easier to do that. We never make promises. That's going to be really important too. We never make promises. We see what we can do. And sometimes there's a need that comes up that I really don't know where to lead them to, but I'm going to do my best to find my research or do my research, and I'm going to make some phone calls and see what I can do. But I always tell them, I can't promise you anything, but I'll give you a call back and see what I can do, because my goal is, and all of our goal is, to lead them to self-sufficiency. We don't want this to be a Band-Aid situation where we're just going to help them this time, and they're going to be in the same position a month later. We want them to be self-sufficient. We want them to be good with budgeting. And, my goal is to get them plugged in with these organizations and get them plugged in with the right people to help them be successful. They don't want to be in this situation, but they really don't know the next steps to take to get out of this situation. It's just constant catch up all the time. We certainly want to, again, lead them to self-sufficiency and we want to show them the love, of Christ while doing so. And, sometimes that looks like meeting a need. And that goes for internal and external benevolence. And Craig can touch base a little bit about our internal benevolence process. That does look a little different.
All right, let me interrupt. Thanks, Lexi, for sharing all that. We've had a number of great questions already coming in, so I want to remind everybody that if you've got a question about what Lexi and Craig are sharing, to go ahead and hit the Q&A button, and we will try and address those here, as many of as we can, as we're getting to the end of the webinar. But we're really glad that you're asking a lot of great questions. And so I don't know if there's one that I could maybe I'll throw this one in just real quick, because it's probably the one on the front end, is just to make sure that we're all speaking the same language. When you talk about benevolence, kind of what's a running definition for how you guys would define benevolence that we're talking about?
As far as anybody that is seeking assistance from us, whether that be food, to pay utility bill, pay rent, things of that nature. Anybody asking for monetary need,
Okay.
external and internal.
All right, that's good. Just want to make sure that we're all on the same page on that. But we've got several of the questions that I think we anticipated might happen. But Craig, why don't you go ahead and pick up the baton and run with us from here, now that we've just understanding what our community has and somewhat what a lot of the gaps might be. That's great information.
Right. It's more likely, and actually I appreciate all the questions too. So I will shoot through the internal pretty quick here, because I'd rather get to these questions. But probably if you have a benevolence plan of any kind, it's probably more internal in nature. We've had one for a long time. We actually have a separate bank account that we take a percentage of our giving and move that over at the end of each month, and it pools there available for benevolent needs within the congregation. That was our policy for a long time. I think it was because we felt like, we know these folks, so we can vet the situations. There may be a temptation to believe that external benevolence would be more difficult. In a lot of ways, internal is more difficult because of those relationships, because the situations and the people, and because sometimes you do have to say no. And so for us, when we talk about internal benevolence, we're talking about requests from church members, regular attenders, and in most cases, immediate family of church members and regular attenders. That tends to happen as well. And so our plan on that hasn't changed a lot. We assist in an internal situation after the first request. If it's a legitimate request, if we have money available, and if our church council, who handles our finances, if they agree, they do handle that, because they are sometimes larger numbers. And so rather than the budgeted and staff approval process we use internal or for external, the internal, we do take it up the ladder a little further. In all honesty, internal requests are a little different because they usually start with me or one of our elders. Folks are typically more comfortable asking one of us or sharing with us a situation they're going through. And so we try to approach internal benevolence first from a pastoral care angle. We try to figure out, is there a greater issue? Is there a greater need? What has gotten us in this position? And so we'll deal with it now through Lexi as well. It goes from pastoral to practical, and she will walk through the same process she uses externally with the folks in the church. Is there assistance out there they're not aware of? Are there ways that they could be helped? Programs they could sign up for, things like that. And then if we feel the need can be met, we will meet it. On a second request with an internal benevolence situation, we will require them to agree to financial counseling. Lexi mentioned before, we've got some folks in the congregation who very generously have been willing to give of their time in financial counseling. I will tell you this, that's often when their requests end, because part of that financial counseling is a budget. They have to kind of share with us their budget as they build it. And that's usually an eye-opening experience for them, because they kind of get a new understanding of the difference between want and need, the things they have to have and the things that are optional. If a third request does come in, If they do that counseling, we'll usually take care of a second request. If a third request comes in internally, we would typically say no, and again try to push them toward financial, accountability and see what we can do in that area. The truth of the matter is, internal or external, when it comes time for us to say no, or to say that that's all we can do, or that's the limit of our funding, it's not as difficult as it would seem. Not everyone's going to like being told no, but if you've explained your process to them, and if you've told them, here's the standard, here's our limitations, if you've done that, then you've done the best you can for them. And the hope would be that even when you get to the point where you say no, you've still treated them in a respectful, Christ-like manner, and they still respect you. Now, have I been hung up on? Yes. Have we had people leave the church related to benevolence issues? Yeah. But are we confident now in the way that we handle those situations that we can handle any request that comes in one way or the other? I think we really are. And so for us, this has been a complete change in the way we deal with benevolence. I honestly think we were scared of it. We were scared of ever saying yes to the people that came to the door. And we were scared of saying no to the people that were part of the church. But the truth is, with more knowledge, a little bit of legwork, and systems in place, you can have confidence in any benevolence situation.
Well, have you guys created any kind of a document that lays out how your plan has come together?
Yes.
Yeah, that was number one. It's actually part of our church policies and procedures manual now, which is our kind of operating document. And so that is something that Lexi put together, that we worked on together, and then that was approved by our church council. And so it's now an official document
All right.
that we can
I'm going to
refer
drive
to.
a poll right now, just asking people to chime in where their church happens to be. Do you have some kind of benevolence plan in writing, whether it's in your policy manual or not? Yes, but it's not really helpful because it's so archaic. No, or you don't know. But I can tell you, having something on paper kind of protects you. You can say, this is what we're able to do, this is what we can't do, rather than you fudging it, because people can kind of know whether you're just kind of making up as you go, and they're going to exploit that. So if you would go ahead and complete this poll for us to kind of know, and we're fairly evenly mixed to where half do, half don't have a plan. And so whether it's useful or not is a whole other story, which about 40% are saying that your plan is fairly useful. So thanks for chiming in on that. I would say we got time here. Craig, are you done with that kind of component about
Sure.
internal
Yeah.
stuff? Or do you have more to say
Yeah.
on that? All right, because we got a great number of questions that I'd like to get into for the next 15 minutes or so. But I would say that I think you're exactly right, that there are people that when you talk within your church, that if you talk about benevolence and taking care of that, they're going to be like, man, that is the last thing in the world I would ever want to be a part of. But there's another group of people that if you talk about this in a message or in some other way and say, we're going to have a team of people that help us with this every month, there are people that their eyes will light up and they're like, I would get to be part of that team. And whether they get to ever be paid like Lexi is, or it's more likely for a church, of 100 or 200 not to have any paid staff that would do that, that to have a team of people that are so empowered and excited about being a part of that team. I also have been in a church where I was able to delegate that and deputize a group of people. It creates a little bit of separation of time as well, where it's not just someone coming in my face and I've got to give them an answer immediately whether we can help them. Is I can say, we've got a great team that can help you within the next 24 hours, and then send them to that team via email or phone. And I felt like that time frame took away some of the immediate urgency of having to make a decision on the spot. And I knew the people were going to really care about the situation as soon as they were presented with it. So I think that's a great advice, is whether you can staff it or not, to find those people in your church, man, their eyes light up when you start talking about getting to do this kind of thing.
I can tell you, we did preach about this a lot around our changeover, because we are taking money that's donated by our congregation and using it for these purposes. So we felt like we needed as much buy-in as possible. And you're right, there were people that I didn't even expect that were, this is awesome, this is wonderful, how can we help, how can we be a part? And
Yeah.
sometimes it's just a matter of sharing the heart behind it, and you realize, man, you're not the only one who feels that way.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's jump into several questions. There's been a bunch of good questions asked. So I'm going to try and moderate these. Uh, I would ask one question that's similar here about just your budgeting is two things. Is your budget, benevolence budget, part of your overall missions budget, or has it been separated out and its own budget?
Yes, it is its own budget, and Craig, correct me if I'm wrong, but it is 4% that we have for internal and external benevolence.
Okay. And do you budget for internal and external, or is it all one group of funds that you need to make decisions as they come in?
Well, we do make decisions as they come in, but we actually have a monthly budget set for external that we stay at, and we, respect that. And once we hit our monthly budget, if a need comes in and we feel like we really want to be able to assist this situation, we bring it to our elders and council, and they can approve it from there.
Okay. And then another question is, if there's any months that you don't spend all your budget, does that roll over to the next month, or what happens with any surplus that you might have in one month?
Anytime we have extra, because it does roll over from time to time, but we still stick to that budget monthly, but we can use that for, larger opportunities we have with maybe projects, or if a major need comes up, and things of that nature.
All right. Well, someone asked the question about benevolence offering, how much of your benevolence should be budgeted out of your missions offering or whatever. So I think every church needs to make that decision, what works for them. But a recommendation that I've made to other churches, as well as practice myself, is in general, grow your missions and benevolence every year as you're able. And sometimes you can't do a ton, but if you were to add 0.5% every year, if you're giving 10% now, in 20 years, you'll be at 20%. You're going to add another 10%, 0.5% for 20 years. And so you kind of ease your way into that, but then you can kind of figure out what you're going to do with that little bit extra every month. Now, here's a couple of typical questions that I thought we knew that would probably be coming. And that is, one of them is, here's the typical worry for all of us is, are you worried that people are going to go spend any benevolence on things you don't want them spending the money on, whether that's alcohol, cigarettes, or other things that you wouldn't want them spending on? How do you guys feel about that, or address that through the way you handle your benevolence?
Well, we would rather say yes with the risk of helping someone than say no with the fear of them misusing it. Something else I suggest too is Walmart has gift cards available that we try and keep on hand, and they are restricted gift cards, so they cannot purchase alcohol, firearms, or tobacco.
All right. And I've heard of those. Those are helpful. And then you're doing some bills directly to the utility
Any
company.
we can, yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful because you know exactly where it's going. Here's another one that we wondered if would come up is, have you ever thought about requiring people who would receive assistance from outside the church to attend a church service to receive the funds?
So I know that's probably a somewhat typical situation. I'm going to give you my personal opinion. Please don't take offense if this is the system you have. I don't like to attach strings to things like benevolence gifts. If somebody comes to us and we work them through the whole process and we feel like the need is legitimate and we have the funds, I just don't, I'm just not sure that I would ever want to say you're only going to be able to receive this gift of love, because we see it as a gift of love if you meet these certain requirements. Have we had people come to services? Absolutely. But it is never something that we've required.
Okay, that's really helpful. Some churches have to make that decision. And so I'm very, very good to know that how you guys have tried to handle that. I would agree with that, we, at the last church I was at, we we tried that policy, but at the end of the time, it felt just more weird than getting to interact with them personally rather than them sitting there and just kind of biding their time for an hour so they could get the help they were looking for. But I do want to say in our follow-up email, we're going to try and attach a document that shows the policies. And Lexi, if you've got any other churches that you collaborated with as you were building your plan that had a similar PDF that we can attach for people to look at, that would be really helpful as well. One question, I think that one's been answered, is if you were going to train someone to be a lead volunteer for this, what would be the first 3 or 4 steps that you would try and do for them for a church that might not be able to staff for this role like you guys were able to do?
The number one thing I would suggest is really just getting familiar with the local organizations around you. Try and get your hands on a directory, like I had mentioned before. In a directory, there'll be a list of organizations as well as social services, and kind of have a breakdown of things, and just being knowledgeable about what is around. And don't be afraid to call these places, and feel free to ask questions, because they are very kind, and they are usually really open to speak with individuals from churches, because they want people referred there. They want to be able to help people. So I actually monthly, I usually do a call around to local organizations and services, and just kind of see what's going on, see if anything has changed, see if any new programs have started up. Just to stay engaged within the community. I really think that's going to be a huge factor, is just knowing those resources available.
Yeah. If you can find someone from one of those organizations that'll kind of hold you by the hand and show you the ropes. I don't know if there's one in your town that would be typical for every town, is the one that you would try and get help through the most, or if it's going to be different in every town.
And it could be different in every town, but I would certainly reach out to your local United Way agency, and even your social services, because if you can get a hold of even just the front staff there, they'll be happy to lead you to another organization that is a wide range of being able to assist in different areas.
All right. We had another couple questions that are related. When you said intake, what does intake mean? And do you have a form for intake there that you might be able to share with us?
Yes, anytime we have anybody call or walk in, I'm going to gather that information from them, name, phone number, address, and I'm going to ask them about their situation. And with that being said, some people are pretty reluctant to give you information, but it is really important that they do so that you're able to assist them. And once I, review their situation that they're in, I do ask them if they're working, where are they working, and kind of just review the situation. And I'm going to see if I think they're eligible for services, because if they are, that is going to be the very first thing that I do, is tell them the services they potentially could be eligible for, as well as other organizations. And then I'm going to help them with either an application process, or I'm going to give them that information that they need to reach the right person to be able to help them with those steps.
All right. Then another person asked, now that you've been doing a whole lot more internally with the plan, are you still supporting some of those external organizations that you were supporting before that you would almost exclusively refer people to?
Yeah, none of that has changed for us. I appreciate the chance to answer that question. We see this as an opportunity in addition to supporting those. And so we have, not to throw too specific percentages, but we have a separate, I think it's about 11% missions budget and a 5% benevolence budget. And instead of taking away from either of those, we added to that budget. And part of that benevolence budget was used for previous internal benevolence. Part of it was those monthly donations to local organizations that we are partners with. And so none of that has changed. We still give them all the same percentage of our giving that they've always gotten. We just now have this additional kind of pool of money budgeted to deal with the external situations.
Yeah. All right. That helps with that, because there's some great organizations out there that are trying to accomplish exactly what you are, and being partners with them is huge. So I'm glad to hear that. I had a group of people that I kind of deputized for this in my last church plant, and they came back with me a statement that I still love that I'd like to share. There's just a couple more questions that we may try and answer. If you've got any final questions you'd like answered from Lexi or Craig, please chime in now so that we've got them in the queue. But with the budget that we had a overseas missions budget, a domestic missions budget, and then a local benevolence budget. And for that one, they came up with the phrase that we're going to help those the most, those we might help most completely. And so I think it's the idea that Lexi was getting at, that the people that we can see that we're going to be able to really help them move forward over the next month or two, those are the ones that we're going to try and help the most, and try and avoid the ones that are just kind of a hit and run. We want $50 and we're out of here. But the ones that look like if we've got the opportunity to help them more completely, then that's the one that if they'll work with us, we'll work with them. And so I thought that was a good phrase that we use kind of as our filter for making decisions between multiple requests, is we're going to help those the most that we could help the most completely. And so I like that guideline. You probably already said this, but this is a good question, is kind of what's your filter for outside benevolence requests when you decide, no, we're not going to help that person, other than when you're just completely out of funds for the month? What are kind of some of the examples of you saying, no, we're not going to help you, if any?
Some examples are, for starters, if we have individuals that excuse me, that have already maybe received services, and they're telling me, well, I've called them, and nobody's helped me. They helped me last month and they helped me the month before. When they're telling me in that situation, I try to then pull out other organizations they may not be aware of that may be able to put them through their programs to help them, because they have exhausted churches and emergency assistance, and already receiving SNAP benefits. Those are certainly situations I look into. I also look into, depending on what they are asking for as well, we do avoid situations where if they're asking to pay their rent, but maybe their landlord, the situation is not maybe through a realtor, and they're wanting us to give them a check or cash, we certainly avoid situations like that as well.
All right. One question that hasn't been asked that I had on my list of potential questions, because we dealt with this sometimes, is, have you ever considered any kind of bartering scenario where people would work for someone in your church for some kind of, financial gift that you would give them? And how's that worked out for you?
Yeah, I kind of tie that fairly close to the, hey, if you come to a service, we'll give you a gift card, or we'll give you some assistance. It's complicated, and you'll find that a lot, because a lot of people will say, I don't want a handout. I'm not asking for a handout, because they assume if they ask for a handout, it's going to be an automatic no. But when you put yourself into a liability situation, when you invite someone onto your property to do work, or connect them with somebody in the community to do some work for, in a way, you're vouching for the quality of the work. There's just a lot of things that can go wrong there. And we would rather approach it from, if this person needs help, and from our vetting process, it's legitimate and we have the funds, we don't really want to tie any strings to it. We just want to say, this is something we can do for you.
Okay. Yeah. For us, it just became really awkward. And some of the kind of that liability is we're sending someone to someone's house in our church to do their yard work. And are we okay with that person being there, and they don't know them, and all that? It just became really awkward. And so we just chose to help the person as best we could without those strings. So that's where we were as well. I want to thank you for being part of our webinar tonight. It was a great discussion, something that's very relevant for every church. But I do want to invite you also to our upcoming webinars that are sponsored by Mid-Atlantic Christian University. We've got one coming up next month. And if you're a layperson at your church, your preacher or other staff need to be a part of this one, which is taking care of yourself spiritually as a leader, as a spiritual leader of your church. And there's a difference between being tired in ministry and being tired of ministry. And there is a fine line in 2020 between those two realities. And so Neil Wheeler, who is on our staff as our director of leader care, is going to be leading a great discussion on making sure that we are taking care of ourselves as leaders in the church so that we're best prepared to take care of the flock that we've been entrusted by God. And then following that in February, that one's coming up in January, this one in February on the 8th, in 2 months, is about effective elder meetings. And one of the services that Waypoint provides is coaching elders, and particularly about their elder meetings. And so I'm going to share my perspective on some great elements for good meetings. I'll also be sharing indirectly some horrible elements for elders meetings. And so your elders and staff will hopefully be a part of that. So please, as you get the information about those 2 webinars, if you would forward those to the people in your church that would be most interested, we would love to have them to be part of that webinars that are coming up in January and February. That all being said, I want to thank you for joining our webinar tonight. We try and keep it right at 55 minutes, which we're right on time for that. And so please stay tuned for the follow-up email with some resources and some samples that we referred to tonight. And we're going to try and answer some of the questions that we had here, both in the chat and in the Q&A stream, so that everybody feels like they had their questions answered. So thank you for letting us try and navigate ministry together. This is one that every church is trying to swim through the stream of figuring this out. And hopefully this was helpful for you tonight. So have a good night. And Craig and Lexi, thanks for sharing your story with us on what you've come up with so far. And hopefully it just becomes an even bigger thing for your church and your community.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
All right.
Absolutely.
All right. Good night, everybody.